Hello, everyone. Welcome to the April session of Dr. Spotfire. My name is Neil Kanungo. I'm your host. Now, today's session, without further ado, is creating electrifying dashboards with Texas ERCOT data. I am very humbled and honored to bring Jonathan Henderson on. Jonathan is the Chief Analytics Officer of Enertel, and he does absolutely stunning work with the visual perception and the visual design of Spotfire dashboards, as well as having good analytic insight. So I thought that today would be a really great opportunity to go under the hood of a complete analysis, talk about the thought processes from someone else's perspective. You hear my perspective often. Well, we can hear today from Jonathan's perspective. Hear about his thought processes, how he acquires data, how he manages his data, and how he goes about taking the styling to another level. So with that, Jonathan, I will hand it over to you if you want to take over.
Thanks, Neil. Appreciate the introduction and kind words. Let me share my screen. We'll start with the dashboard. So you should be able to see this now. Really, the point was to take publicly available data, starting with the EIA. They have a great API tool. They can pull in plant level data, but also kind of facility data. And then we have demand and forecast demand and composition, and then we can look at a variety of trends that will give us some insight into what exactly happened in the power crisis. And so we created this dashboard to walk through kind of a timeline, and then give users the ability to scroll in and zoom in and figure out, okay, what generation sources failed, when did they fail, and then hopefully start getting into why they failed. But this is kind of the starting point, where we have the ability to dive into particular generation types and figure out, if I wanted to look at solar production through a specific period of time. And I've already zoomed in on the time points of interest, and we've flagged when the blackouts occurred, when outages ended, when the storm began, so you can kind of see what the generation profile looked like before and after the crisis. So, and then what we started with was really the API. And we have access to just about everything in here from the EIA API. And we started with building just a data function where it's a simple script. We started, it's a Terra script, so it's all using R. And this just plugs in, an API key. And this is pulling in the API function. So we have a URL, and it's pulling in the essentially each code that we want to get for the specific plant level data. And then we're doing some manipulation on the data to create a couple tables for, for coal and for nuclear and wind and solar and nat gas. So we're creating a few tables, and then the one table that we didn't have access to through the EIA API was actually the pricing data. So we had to go to ERCOT's website and pull down the pricing data, and then just embedded that as a CSV. So this pulls in all the API data directly in, and we're left with, if we go to the data canvas, we can actually pull down and look at all the tables we have. So the pricing hourly, there's generation series data, which is just coming straight from the EIA and pulling out specific level facility data, and we can see the columns we've added and look at how this all kind of blends together.
Yeah, I think this is interesting when you were showing this to me last week, and it's interesting because when you're pulling data from an API and you're using a data function, you can do the data prep right there in the script, or you can pull the raw table from, or JSON, flatten it out, denormalize it. It's something we've done actually in Dr. Spotfire in the past for any of our viewers that are interested. And then you can do the prep in the data canvas, so it's kind of totally up to you. And I like how you did this approach of spitting out clean tables, multiple tables from one API call, right?
Yeah, and then the nice thing is all the because it's largely coming from one source outside of ERCOT for pricing, is it's the column names are they didn't need a lot of manipulation to all talk to each other. So we were able to create the column relations and the matchups pretty easily. But had we needed to rename columns, we could have done that within the data canvas or straight within the Terra script like we did.
Right. Before we go too much more into the hood, can you maybe tell us a little bit more about the charts that you chose? As far as the information, I see a pricing information, you have a forecast and demand. We know there was an incident in Texas in February where there was a kind of a freak winter storm and the grid was compromised. And I think when we discussed this, it was trying to figure out, why did that happen, and kind of doing a post-mortem on what were the effects on pricing, what were the effects on different generation types. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about the data you chose and the visualizations you chose to investigate that.
Yeah, so at a high level, I wanted to start with facility data. So figuring out, where are the generation facilities within Texas, so being able to plot all these data points out, and then, looking at top 10 generation facilities, and we can, change this by clicking here. And, if I wanted to show the top 20, the nice thing is it's all, pretty interactive, so we can go through and look at that. So simple bar chart, categorized by the rank of last month's, you know, production for power. And you can actually click on this. So I can click on the South Texas project, and this will bring up the satellite view. So I can see that this is a nuke plant. I can go down to Comanche Peak and see that this is also a nuclear plant, Martin Lake, coal plant. So this gives me the ability to dive into and figure out, what are the main generation sources within Texas. So I like bar charts a lot because you can create this. It's a really neat looking visualization. Gives you quick information on what are the top 10 or top n data points of interest, and then we can also color this so you're getting the visual impact as well. So I can quickly see. The South Texas project produces, quite a bit more in Cottonwood and Lamar and some of the other facilities. So that was that. And then the other charts, just being able to look at, this is actually a scatter plot. The scatter plot was created in a way that's using, it's
Tile
really
mark.
kind of creating like a heat map.
Yeah.
And so this gives the ability to go and figure out, which specific days and hours were at peak demand. So this gives me kind of that visual heat map of what period of time had a strong, demand profile. And then the
And for those
composition.
wondering, the scatter plot in the appearance setting, it has a little checkbox for using tiled markers, and or yeah, the shape. Sorry, the shapes I'm using for tiled markers, and then I looks like you trellis there as well, right?
Yes, and so this is actually trellised by month date.
And I love
So
the customization you did on the trellis headers to match the rest of the dashboard aesthetic.
yeah, in the color scheme, you'll notice, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but the color scheme between all these visualizations, they all tie together. So this gives me some visual continuity between everything I'm looking at. When I'm looking at trends here, that when my wind color within this visualization is also the same if I click on wind here. So just that continuity, that way, if I categorize something as wind and this is the color I want it, I'm going to use that same color theme throughout the other visualizations. But um, just about everything else in here is mostly line charts, and this is showing me composition here. This is just a bar chart kind of squished together, give you that stacked, almost like a stacked area chart visualization, just showing what the composition was throughout the crisis, so you can kind of see when natural gas produced significantly more than what it had been heading into the storm. And then everything else is just line charts, just being able to visualize what the actual demand was. And so you can really start diving in here that my actual demand and my forecast demand. So I can see that my actual demand started outpacing right as that storm rolled in through Texas, what the forecasts were. And so when that's happening, they're getting the forecast wrong. That kind of started leading into some other issues. And then we can dive into pricing. I can see again when the storm begins what pricing's generally at, 20 $23 for a megawatt hour, and then you can see it hit this cap of $9,000 a megawatt hour during the storm. And after the blackouts, you can kind of see when all these pricing spikes started and ended eventually. And then if I wanted to look at generational issues, um, depending on what side of I guess, the political aisle you're on, you heard, different sides pointing fingers at others. on which generation sources failed and didn't fail. But we really wanted to look at the data, and the whole point is being able to get and convey findings effectively, honestly, and impactfully. And so, by pulling that data in from the EIA, I can actually inspect myself. I can look at solar, or I can select both of these just holding my control key, and I can look at wind and solar, and I can see kind of when the storm started and throughout. And if I'm looking at the blackouts, if I really zoom in, I can see that there really wasn't a major change as the blackouts started rolling in. Really wasn't a major change in wind and solar production. If I look at natural gas, however, I can see there was a massive drop in generation right as the blackouts occurred. So this tells me that there was likely a natural gas failure that led to the rolling blackouts. And then because the grid's on a normalized basis, as certain generation plants go offline, other plants are forced offline because the system runs at a certain 60 hertz, and so when certain plants are forced offline unexpectedly, you can see that other plants eventually fail, and you can see the same thing happen with coal and nuclear. So this gives me the ability to go through and pick and choose what data sources were there, and kind of the overall groupings of power and when the blackouts occurred. So I can dive into and figure out what exactly generation sources did fail. And you'll see, when I select something, all these calculated values dynamically adjust. So this gives me the average production before the crisis, the max before the crisis, the average during the crisis. So if I wanted to look at solar and wind and the combined generation, I can just select these and then look at that.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like multiple different sources struggled. We're all kind of affected to some level. I like that this dashboard is around analyzing the crises. So you oriented your KPIs as before the crises, the average before, the max before, average during, max during. So you can actually get that comparison to this particular event. That's very interesting. I've actually never done that myself, but I think it's a very useful and creative way you've done that.
Yeah, and one of the things that I had to actually pay attention, close attention to, is that if I'm just doing a simple minimum calculation, if solar obviously doesn't produce any power at night, you can see it goes down to zero. So you can see the minimum crisis here. But when I select wind and solar, it gives me the combined minimum. And so this is just doing a sum over intersect of both those generation types. So it's summing both of those values combined and then finding the minimum. Whereas if I just chose minimum, it would show zero. So little things like that, and being able to calculate that dynamically, can make a pretty big difference as well.
It's interesting, and I like how you have multiple charts that change from these selections when you change like your generation type. And I think we even discussed that there's multiple time sliders here. We could have even done or you could have even done a single time slider in the top left, and that would have controlled all the charts
Right.
on one time slider rather than go to multiple ones. But you have kind of the option here, right?
Yep.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is that since I do have multiple options here, these are all in a multi-select list box. And the reason I do this rather than like a drop down is I can see all the options without having to click a button. So it just gets to kind of the fundamental UI UX is that I can see all the generation sources here, and I can kind of click and choose these together or just one at a time. So I'm actually a big fan of these rather than drop downs. If I have multiple things I want to show all at once, even where I just have a true false for toggling these lines on and off, I think it's one click to get what you want done rather than having to click a drop down and then click the value you want.
Right. Well, I think we all want to learn more about how did you make this look so beautiful? How did you customize these sliders and these list boxes that you were just talking about? Um, Maybe you can start showing us a little bit behind your methodology and how you manage your CSS code, where you use CSS, where you use out of the
Yeah.
box Spotfire.
Yeah, so I can let me show my web. So really, there are a handful of resources that I go to for creating visualizations. I think everything kind of starts at typography. Just when you're creating a data visualization, the font you choose can also convey things. It's like writing, you wouldn't want to write a resume in Comic Sans because it conveys certain things you don't necessarily want to convey. And so by choosing the right fonts and modern fonts or something that conveys, that what you're trying to convey, I think is useful. So this is hellohappy.org. This actually gives you font pairings, so I can go and see. And these are actually right here are the font pairings I've used within the dashboard. So this is Oswald, which is a Google font, and then I swapped out, but this is a mono, essentially a monotype font, which is great for any kind of numerical or tabular entries. So being able to find inspiration of fonts and look at Google fonts, which is a great source. And then in addition to choosing the font, but it's also the sizing, being able to get your H1, H2, and the body fonts all appropriately. So I use this website. It's typescale.com, and I think Neil's going to be putting these in the chat as well. So if you wanted to use these resources, you can. But I'm a big fan of this. Just this gives you essentially all the CSS code you need to create and visualize creating your typography. So I can use like a major third, and this will give me all the sizing for my headers and my body, and then I can actually even then use a list of all the available Google fonts. If I wanted to create, this exact same thing, I can go to Oswald for my header, and then I can use JetBrains Mono for my body font. And I can kind of see how this all ties together. So I will generally iterate in something like this first, and this kind of tells me these font pairings work well. This is probably one of my favorite resources.
So use the what's it called, the Hello Happy, just to get some inspiration, so you're not coming in from scratch, and then try to iterate with that with the other typography.
Yeah, and then just searching on Google Fonts, you can pick and choose whether it's a sans serif or a serif or a
Hmm.
monospace font. So you can go through and find kind of fonts that you think are visually appealing. I use Oswald in this dashboard, and then JetBrains Mono, which is the same font I use in my coding IDE. So this is a great way, and it's not Google Fonts also. They have icons, and there are a variety of other things. There's material design, so where you can go through and pick and choose. Like accessibility is another core concept to really understand. Make sure you're picking colors and contrasts that are accessible to a variety of users.
Well, I think these tools are really useful because it's one thing to know the have the technical skills to change fonts or make custom CSS, but it's another thing of knowing what it should look like. And I think that's where things get really tricky, right? And I mean, we talk about this with color a lot. It's one thing to know how to change the color. It's another thing to know what to change the color to. And there's a lot that goes into the visual design theory that's very difficult, I think, for us all to master while also mastering our domain of technical experience and data. And there's a lot to know. So these tools, I feel they do 80-90% of the work for you, right?
Yep.
And help you.
And a lot of these tools, like even the typography website, it will give you the H1, H2, H3 body font CSS. So you can just copy and paste it into your visualizations. And I always say that a text area in Spotfire is just like a website, and so you can really wrangle it in any way you want and kind of make it pop like we've done with this dashboard. And then so a lot of these tools will actually write the CSS for you, so I can go through and pick my colors and what kind of font, and for gradients I can create my own custom gradient, and then it'll give me all the code that I can just copy paste to use within the text area, which is exactly what I did for the dashboard. There's actually, and if you need inspiration, this is webgradients.com, and you can kind of scroll through until you find a gradient that you like. And if you want it, it'll just copy the CSS, and then you go over and paste it in. So it's really easy to go through and pick a color scheme that works really well. And then one of the last things I wanted to show is just color schemes. So, after I pick my background gradients and I pick a main color like the bright green we have in the dashboard. I'll paste that in. This is my color dot space. So you can paste that in here, your hex code, and then this will generate a palette for you. So if this looks familiar, it's because this is the exact same palette we use in the dashboard. So I just plug in my primary, and then this creates a variety of palettes for you. So you don't have to have a master's degree in color theory and being able to find color schemes that match really well with the overall visual appeal you're trying to go for.
You know, I really like this tool. I've always used different color scheme tools, and I've shown to the Dr. Spotfire audience, but these were some new ones I hadn't seen before. And I really like about when you scroll down, this generic gradient is, and the other gradients that the other color schemes that it shows is you're really giving it one color, a primary color. I can't remember if we've talked about this much in the past, but Spotfire gives you the ability in the canvas styling to put in a primary color, and that primary color is going to become the color of the highlighted elements in a list box. It's going to be the color of the buttons on a map. It's going to be the color of the filters. It goes towards everything, adds almost like an accent. So you give it a primary color, but then there's so many other types of palettes you might want to have. And I've always gone and tweaked with, different sliders and color wheels, but this just kind of gives it right to you. And you can very easily see if you like something or don't like something.
Definitely. And there's a variety of other websites that I'll go through and use. So color-hex.com. So once I plug in my main background color, any kind of accents. So for example, you'll see I'll go back to the dashboard here in a minute. But the little highlights, whether I'm trying to add a drop shadow or adding a highlight within a certain area of the text areas, I'll plug in that background color here, and then this gives me different tints and shades, so I can go and pick and choose. Again, it's doing all the heavy work for me, where I'm getting the hex codes for all the accent colors that I also need to use for making the visual. And then buttons, we'll create this button, essentially the fetch button for the API. But this is Neumorphism, which is one of the design components that I'm a big fan of. And so again, this creates all the CSS for you, and I can use these sliders to create the exact button profile I want. If I wanted to have this, be just a regular square, if I wanted to add some corner radius values, you can see the CSS down here is changing. And then for when the button's pressed, you can just change the status of the button, and then this will give you the CSS for this as well. So this is giving me all the tools I need to go through and create these buttons from scratch and then paste in. And so with that, I will show my Visual Studio.
So as you're pulling up your CSS code, I just want to tell the audience, recently on our YouTube channel, we put out a couple videos on CSS styling for buttons and how to create fancy KPIs. We started to go a little bit into how to bring the CSS code into Spotfire, and some of the things you can do. Also, Julie Sebi did a great session on this last year, around about a year ago. So make sure you check out the YouTube channel if you're totally new to this. But I think we'll go off the assumption that people have a basic understanding of how CSS works, or at least how to copy and paste CSS from these web tools into Spotfire. Go ahead, Jonathan. Please show us your developer.
So I use VS Code a lot for just about everything. You can write just about any language you want in here. So for the JavaScript, for the Spotfire mods, I write R and Python within VS Code. There's plugins to run just about any kind of code you want. I can even create Docker units and things like that. So I love this program, and you can customize it. So I have my own color scheme and icons. But the nice thing about this is really project control. So for this dashboard, I have a CSS file, I have an Iron Python file for the line charts. And I also have the R script for essentially what we've created to go and pull down that data. But today I think I'm just going to kind of focus on the CSS. So for the button, there's actually the doc property for the button is this .sfc action button. And then there's different statuses. So one is active. So when I actually click the button, what does the button do? And then when I have this hover, so if I'm just hovering over it, what do I have, happen to the button, just to give any kind of visual indication that the button is clickable and you can interact with it. So this is some base level CSS, and a lot of this is just copy pasted from that neumorphic design page where I have my linear gradient. These are the gradient colors it created. It creates the box shadow for me, and the transition to ease in and out of this state into the next state. And so we're essentially just taking this document property and we're telling Spotfires to use Oswald as the font to match all the other typography, and then the font weight and size and the heights. And so if I just take this and I copy paste and I go back to the dashboard, so if I open up this HTML, there's actually all the lists of the CSS items we've plugged in. So I've pasted in already this action button, so you can see the action button here. Again, it's all the same CSS that was in my VS Code. And so once I do this, it's then creating this styling. So if I hover over it, it's giving me like that glow feature of the fetch to go and pull down that API data. If I click it and hold that down, you can see it. It also gives me that drop shadow on the top. So we're able to go through and create these. And then this background, the gradient that we created is just this text area, the HTML text area. And we can just go and plug in the CSS for the HTML text area, and it's going to create this background. If I don't want to use HTML and CSS, I can actually just click on this background color and get a fixed color as well. But I think the gradients kind of pop. So this is that radial gradient we used from the web page, just kind of copy pasted in. So this gives you a little bit more visual appeal, and you can see. If I go back to the VS Code again, we have a lot of different elements in here. We've messed with the text boxes and the list box and drop down. So there's a ton of different elements that we can add customization to that'll give you the look and feel of the dashboards. We're changing the way the sliders look and everything like that. So.
Why don't you show us how you figured out what those IDs were, those elements were? I know we've shown in the past, but I think it'd be great to.
Under tools, there's a developer tools, and then this brings a pop-up. And then this is essentially kind of the back end for Spotfire. So this shows me all the underlying
I don't know if we're-
CSS. What was
Yeah,
that?
I don't know if we're seeing your pop-up.
There we go. So this is the developer tools. And so this is giving me the back, all the information. So the body for all the Spotfire elements. So I can actually click on this, and then when I go to and I highlight a certain item within Spotfire, it's giving me all the elements. So if I highlight the button and I can click it, this gives me that Spotfire the styling code I need for this. So this is SFC action button here. So this is actually the CSS that we've copied and pasted in. This is the element we pulled in. So I've just gone through and done this for just every component within the visualization.
Yeah, I think it's a little hard on Zoom to share two screens at once, but what John is doing is, yep, that's a great demonstration here. You can hover on all these different parts of the page, and then in another window, that developer tools is going to show you the elements, and it looks like you can see them here as well. And that's how you get those Spotfire element IDs. Yep.
And so every one of these elements can be, picked apart and customized, and really throughout the entire visualization. And so the whole point was to create this unified vision. So the text area within this area has the gradient, and this is another text area with the same gradient. And then we're using a map in here. So I'm actually loading in a custom Mapbox theme. So the nice thing about Spotfire, the GIS components, is you can load in WMS layers, TMS layers. So I've actually just created a Mapbox using Mapbox Studio, a theme that kind of matched the overall color scheme of the dashboard. So once you do that, you're really left with something that kind of has this contiguous visual appeal across the entire dashboard.
It's really quite simple to use Mapbox. Um, I don't know, John. I could show it on my screen if we don't want to expose your API keys. I don't mind exposing mine. They're not used too widely, but yeah, I could here. Maybe I'll just share on my screen here. So I really like Mapbox as well. It is free to set up an account, and you get an account, and you get like something like 50,000 tile accesses, yeah, per month for free. So like I've never even paid for anything because I never hit the tile requests. But you can go into a studio, and it gives you some starting. Here's actually the background using the ERCOT dashboard we have on our demo gallery, but it gives you some starter templates that you can try. And from any of these, you can customize it. This is also basic, and then there's there's streets, there's outdoor, whatever. So you get that, you get variants of that as well, and you can customize it. And when you customize it, you can change the fonts to match the fonts and typography you're using in your Spotfire dashboard. You can change the symbols. You can de-emphasize things. You have all kinds of customization here. And then when you're done, you just hit share. And the way I always do it, John, I don't know if you do it the same way, but I get a WMTS layer, or I'll get a fulcrum layer, and that the fulcrum layer, I just copy that, and that goes into a TMS layer in Spotfire. Is that how you do it as well?
Yeah, that's plug and play. So it adds your API key for the authentication. So you can just copy that and then go straight into Spotfire, and then add that as a TMS layer immediately. And
Layers, yeah, map layers, TMS
yeah,
layers.
TMS layer.
Let's see if it works. Sometimes it takes a little time to. Yep, there you go. So that layer I was just messing with in Mapbox, it's now in this dashboard. So full customization of your background layers there.
And it's just the little things like this, where if you customize the map to the colors of your company, or what you're trying to create, it makes a pretty big difference in overall visual appeal, rather than just using some of the default settings.
Yeah. Yeah, and someone asked, just now, interesting to use that Mapbox as a base layer, and can we not get the base layer from Spotfire? So Spotfire's base layer is you have a kind of default light scheme, which has a lot of detail in it. And then you have a dark scheme, which is more of that monochrome style, but you can get a lot more detail, a lot more control from Mapbox. But I also say detail because I think their satellite imagery is pretty high resolution as well. And
Hmm. Yeah, as we saw with the being able to zoom in on the plant level details, you can load in as many different TMS layers for mapping, and then have them show up at different zoom levels, which is what I've done. Where it's the stylized version of the Mapbox layer on the when you zoom out, and then you zoom in, it's a satellite image, so you can see that this is clearly a coal plant or a nuke plant or a wind farm. Um, so that's some of the neat features as well.
well, with that, I'll say, John, thanks for joining us today. Awesome presentation, awesome work. I'm picking up some of those tips myself. Next time, we're actually going to be joined by another chief analytics officer, the TIPCO chief analytics officer, my boss, Michael O'Connell. And we're going to kind of continue this discussion on visual perception. The next conversation is going to go less about styling and more about just understanding how shapes and color and context, how that's used to communicate, and how that can improve the overall cohesion and communication of your dashboard and visual analytics. So we hope you join us for that. And again, John, thanks for joining us. And
Thank you.
yeah,
Yeah,
let's
appreciate you having me. This was a lot of fun.
yeah, hope to have you again sometime. Take care.
Thanks.